Unleash Success Podcast, where we break down the secrets of success to give you real tools and strategies that get real results. And now, here's your host, Corey Corpodian.
Welcome back to Unleash Success. If you haven't subscribed to our newsletter yet, just go to unleashsuccess.com, enter your email so you can get all the tools and strategies sent directly to you each and every week. Today, I'm really excited to interview Michael O'Brien, who runs Peloton Business and Leadership Coaching and Consulting, and really created this business after a life-altering event where he was struck head-on by a speeding SUV while riding his bicycle. Michael considered that his last bad day and then wrote a book called Shift so that he can help others in the world create better tomorrows. That's where we're getting started today, and we're going to break down the secrets of creating a better tomorrow for you. Michael, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Corey, man, thanks for having me. Longtime listener, glad to be part of your Peloton, of your community, and to all your listeners out there. Hello, and I'm looking forward to a great conversation with you.
Absolutely. You know, one of the big reasons that I loved connecting with you is because of the mindset. You know, to have one of the worst days of your life become your last bad day. I wanted to understand exactly how you discovered that, how you kind of recovered from that, and maybe start off with what exactly happened to begin with.
Yeah, we'll start there. So it was July 11th, 2001. I was 33 years old at the time. My daughters were 3.5 years old, 7 months old, Elle and Grady. Been married 7 years. And I was doing the corporate thing. So I was the marketing director for our company's biggest product. And we were having an offsite meeting, like one that many of your listeners have probably been to. You fly out to New Mexico. That's where we were, north of Albuquerque, south of Santa Fe, in the middle of nowhere in New Mexico. And fly in Monday, fly back on Friday. I was training for a bike race. I've been a lifelong avid cyclist. So I decided, hey, why not bring my bike out, get a couple of morning miles in, avoid the hotel gym, cross New Mexico off the states I've ridden my bike in, you know, sort of deal with some get some vitamin D to deal with all the PowerPoint, the death by PowerPoint that we were going to be subjective to in the course of the meeting. And on that morning, I was doing a little loop, Corey, about 2 miles out the back of the hotel, up the main entrance. And I came around a bend, and there was that SUV had crossed fully into my lane. When people look at the photos in the book, you can see that he was right there, and I had no time to react. It was just like that surreal moment, like nothing really computed. To like, oh, wow, that car is coming right at me. It's certainly going to see me. It's going to avoid me. And it was just going so fast. And I was going about probably like around 20 miles an hour, and I just had nowhere to go. I just could not react fast enough. And I remember the sound of me hitting his grill and then being thrown into his windshield. And I still can hear the screech of his brakes and then the thud I made as I came off his hood down to the asphalt below. And I was knocked unconscious, as you know, many people would expect. And then the EMTs arrived. I woke up, I regained consciousness, and I looked at them, and I asked the only question that like another cyclist can really truly appreciate. I was like, hey, how's my bike? And they're like, what? Like, I was like, yeah, how's my bike? And the thing is, like, I did that sort of by design because I knew I was in a mess. Like, even the thought of moving was painful. I couldn't move. I was, frightened to death. I had all this activity around me, but still, with all the people and all the EMTs, the police, the fire trucks, the ambulance, I still felt really scared and really lonely. I was like, oh my God, what is happening? And so I tend to use humor to cut tension, and that was my attempt to cut some tension because there was a lot of tension on that morning with, which is sort of the understatement of the day, perhaps.
So you remember hitting the car, actually?
Oh, totally. Oh, yeah. I remember everything, Corey, about that whole day. Like, except for those few minutes where I got knocked unconscious. I remember the whole time being there at the accident scene, all 19 minutes of my medevac flight to the rooftop at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque, and down the elevator shaft, down the elevator into the trauma center. For listeners of a certain age, I will reference ER, the TV show that was popular back in the day. And then a lot of people are like, is that like Grey's Anatomy? I was like, it's so much cooler than Grey's Anatomy. But ER was like was one of my favorite shows. And I felt like there I was, like backboard, neck brace. All I could do was look up, and they wheeled me in, and I met my orthopedic surgeon. And
wow, what?
And then I don't remember anything once I met the anesthesiologist for the next 4 days.
Wow, 4 days.
Yeah, I was in the ICU for 4 days, pretty much drugged up. And they had me strapped down because I was really agitated. I was fidgety. But I remember, like, on the accident at the accident scene, because I was awake. I was with it. They put a morphine drip in, and they called the helicopter to take me to the trauma center. And all I remember, there are two things that I vividly remember, is that I was trying to will myself not to fall asleep. I was like, Michael, whatever you do not fall asleep. Do not fall asleep. Stay awake. Stay awake. And I was definitely feeling a little drowsy, right? I was going in and out of consciousness. My body was fighting with me. And I was like, but you got to stay awake. You got to control this, right? Because before my last bad day, I thought if I could control things, like I could make the outcome that I wanted happen. So here I was, ridiculous as it sounds. I thought I was like, well, if I stay awake, I can control this. I can manage the situation, which is silly when you look back on it. The other thing I remember is when I was put into the helicopter to take me to the trauma center, I remember promising myself that if I lived, which I knew was in doubt, that I would change my life. I would stop chasing happiness. I was pretty good at trying to chase happiness before my accident. So I made a commitment to myself. If I get through this, you're going to start living a different type of life, Michael, and not go about chasing happiness. What that solution was, I had no idea at the time. All I knew is that I didn't want to continue living my life the way I was living it.
Incredible. Incredible realization. But when you're faced with death, you really look back on your own life really in depth, and especially when you're in doubt, looking for anything, a lifeline, literally, you do anything to change it. I'm curious too, is, you remember hitting the car. What goes through your mind when you see that car? When you have no way to escape and this is all going to happen right now. What was going through your head?
Well, like anybody that's been in an accident, car accident, falling off the bike, or just like a collision of any sort, everything slowed down. It was like total slow motion. Like the right before the impact was super slow, and then it went fast forward. Right, I still to this day I can bring it up, and I was like, God, this ain't happening. Like, why is that? One, it was speeding. The speed limit there was 20 miles an hour. So it was not a big road. It was a service road coming into the back of the hotel. So I could tell that the car was going way faster than the posted speed limit. And I just couldn't compute, like, why is that car there? Like, why? Like, it's going to move. It's going to move. It's going to move. Oh my God, it's not going to move. Oh. And that all happens like in 15 seconds. Because I came around a bend and was somewhat blinded, and I just had no time to react. And I spent, technically probably spent the first half of the time that I had to react, which wasn't much to begin with, thinking certainly it's going to move over. It's going to self-correct itself. It's going to move back into its own lane. And this is all going to be like, oh, wow, a story I'm going to share with everyone at breakfast. Like, oh my God, a car almost it was totally in my lane and I just missed it. Like, it was going to be one of those stories. And then it became a completely different story where I was clinging for my life. And what I didn't realize at the time was the collision broke a whole bunch of everything. But the main thing that made it a life and death situation was that my left femur really took the brunt of the impact, and that shattered. And when it shattered, one of the bone fragments lacerated the femoral artery.
Oh my God.
So in essence, I was bleeding out in the middle of nowhere, New Mexico. The doctors later told my wife, had I been 10 years older or not in shape at the time, I certainly would not have made it to the trauma center. I needed 34 units of blood product that first surgery. So my wife likes to say, that bike nearly killed you, Michael, but the bike saved your life because I was riding it so much. I had sort of a good vasculature in my body that gave me some protection.
The irony.
But yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It's a little freaky. It's like, oh yeah. So, but yeah, the doctor said, like you're not, it's a miracle that you're alive. And it's also a miracle that I have both my legs because both of them were broken very badly. And I went to a lot of orthopedic specialists across the country just looking for second opinions as I tried to regain my functionality. And a lot of them said, hey, if you came into our hospital in your condition, we would probably have amputated your leg above your knee just to save your life. So whoever your doctor was that day, he did a remarkable job. And he's part of my medical peloton. Dr. Robert Skang, did a miraculous job that day.
Incredible.
And I feel very lucky that he was on call. And he knew how to do orthopedics and he knew how to do trauma, which is just sort of a remarkable combination.
So you mentioned that in the airplane or in the helicopter, the medevac, while you're literally fighting for your life, you made a decision that if you lived, you would change the way you were living, that you wouldn't chase happiness anymore. What do you mean by chasing happiness? And why didn't you want to live the same life anymore? What was the thing going on in your life and how did you shift that?
Yeah, great question. So the chasing happiness is completing the sentence that a lot of people, even to this day, repeat to themselves. I'll be happy when. So the way I answered it, I'll be happy when I get promoted. I'll be happy when I buy that fancy new car. I'll be happy when this meeting is over or this project is done. It will slow down. I used to come home sometimes when it got really busy at work and I would tell my wife, and we're balancing 2 kids and new parents. And I'd be like, honey, it's just a busy time right now. It's going to be better. It's going to slow down once this meeting is over. And she would look at me and she'd be like, you've been telling that lie for the last 2 years. It ain't ever going to slow down. Like, in a lot of ways, you don't want it to slow down. But I always felt like, well, I'll be happy when like that happens. And the thing is, I went out and bought the fancy car that all my coworkers had because it was all about status. And I got promoted. And in the moments after, I was happy. I was like, oh, this new car. I bought a Mercedes C-Class. It wasn't the fanciest Mercedes, but it was my first luxury car that I ever bought. I was still early in my career. I was like, yeah, I've made it. And I was happy for, a few months. And then after a while, the shine sort of came off the apple. It's like, well, it's just a car. Or I got promoted. I'm like, yeah, I got the promotion. I got the title. I got more money. And then I realized, well, more levels equals more devils. And I went back to like stress. Because what I was doing, going back to like the type of life, if you had looked at my life just from a distance, you would have seen, hey, this guy's got it. This guy's got a pretty good life. He's got a good marriage. He's got 2 amazing daughters. He's got a good job. He must be happy, right? I had all the signs of like, doing well, right? I wouldn't say I was wealthy, but I was doing pretty good.
Yeah.
But what I was doing though, is I was trying to play Superman at work because I was the leader of my team. And I thought, well, leaders have to have all the answers. So I have to shoulder all this responsibility. So I was trying to play Superman at work. But when I came home, because I was the dad and I was the husband and I was the primary breadwinner, I thought I had to be Superman at home. So I would project out this image like, yeah, I'm all good. Like, I'm all that in a bag of chips. I got it. I'm calm. Like, Michael's calm, like a river, like, just cool, right? But what I was doing was pouring a whole bunch of stress inside of me. I was just pouring it in, and I wouldn't necessarily like release it.
So you're more like a dam holding onto that water, and it was just building up.
Yeah, and that's what happens. Like a dam holding water, or you're trying to repress or control. Going back to the control world, word, or restrict what you're pouring inside of you, eventually all that mojo, all that energy, whatever you want to call it, it's got to go somewhere. Right. For me, that SUV literally and figuratively knocked all that bad mojo out of my body on my last bad day. But I was trying to, there was a cost to that, right? So if you're pouring all this stuff inside, or you're carrying around a lot of your like not so great energy in your backpack and bringing it to every meeting or every encounter, then you don't really have great energy management. You feel drained and tired. And that's how I felt. So like I should have been happier and had more gratitude for what I had. But I kept on saying, well, I'll be happy when I get the next thing. And there's a saying by this guy named Zig Ziglar. Many of your listeners will probably remember. But I heard it way back when. I was sort of living a life, as Zig called it, a do, have, be type of lifestyle. So the do was, today's standard is hustle and grind, right? You got to work your tail off, right? Oh. So to have all that stuff, the title, the fame, the iconic social media, the followers, the likes, you'll have all that. And then you'll be happy, or you'll be successful, or you'll be wealthy. And in the early part of my life, that's how I was living. And it wasn't healthy. I knew eventually like something was going to burst. I just didn't know when, but I was trying to like sort of fake it until I made it, if you will. And then I had my accident. So when I got onto that helicopter, I was like, God, I'm so tired of being tired. I'm tired of being drained. There's got to be a better way. There's got to be a different way than just chasing happiness. And I didn't know, like at the time, like I didn't know what the answer was, but I knew there had to be a better way. And I told myself, if I live, I'm going to find that better way.
It's so interesting because I feel like in very different ways, we had a similar experience. Mine was where I just was achieving goals, and it was always about the goal, the next goal, the next goal, and the next goal. And whatever it was, I had this definition of success that was so crazy and so out of like, I had millions of dollars and in the bank, and, I had the nice car. And like, if I didn't have that, even though I was working towards it in this weird way, I just could never let myself be happy. And so, like you're talking about that quote where it's do, have, be, I really think it should be do, have. And you should be happy first, do what you love, and then you'll have all the things you want in life. And it's weird how, for people who are out there chasing money, how it's hard when you don't have a lot of money to understand that, but it really creates this huge pain and suffering because you wake up one day when you finally get the promotion, when you finally get the car, whatever it is you want, and you go, shit, is this it? Is that really all that there is to this life? What was I doing? What was I doing it all for? And I hope that people don't get to that level and that they understand that, you can choose to be happy here and today while you're still pursuing the goals. I'm a big hustle and grind guy, but I'm also big on practicing gratitude, mainly because I struggle with it. I mean, like I really do struggle with, I work so hard and I'll forget like, oh, I should really spend time with my friends and family, or I should really be super grateful for everything that I have right now. And I think it's kind of a balancing act. It's something that I struggle with, but I know that the more I practice gratitude, the better I get at it. And the more appreciative I am of life, and honestly, the happier I am just on a daily basis. For you, what was that mindset shift for you? Like, what did you do when you 4 days later you wake up, and you're sitting there and you're going, okay, I said I would change my life. Now what?
Great question, Corey. And I just wanted to say, like, what you just shared is awesome. It's one of the reasons why I love your podcast so much in terms of, gratitude and still like hustling and grinding. I do feel like we still got to go out there and put in the work. We still got to make things happen. It's the integration of all this so we can have a really complete life. So I just want to acknowledge what you said. Thanks. I think it was really like so spot on. But yeah, so I came out of the ICU and they started telling me about my accident and all the limitations I was going to face. And in the spirit that we go where our eyes go, well, the doctors were telling me, like, look over here, Michael. Look at your dependency that you're going to have. Look at those knee replacements that you're going to have. Look at the future surgeries and all the things that you're not going to be able to do anymore. And I started fixating on all the things I couldn't do and didn't have. And I had a different life, but not in the way that I thought. It became dark. I was angry. The driver had a revoked license. I was bitter. In the middle of the night when visiting hours were over and my wife went back to the hotel room, I would cry myself to sleep. I'd be like, why did this happen to me? This is so freaking unfair. Like, this should have never happened. I was in the process of arguing with reality, but when you argue with reality always wins and the suffering continues. And I sat in that for a while. I couldn't really sleep. I was so drugged up. I was so uncomfortable. The first surgery, they basically just fixed my left leg. They didn't have time to fix my right leg because I was under anesthesia for too long. They never worked on my right shoulder. And I just was like, oh my God, if I can't be who I was, even though I made a commitment on the helicopter, I didn't want to be that guy anymore, right? Like, who was I going to become? Like, my identity. I questioned the whole thing, and I didn't have a pathway, but all I knew was everyone's telling me, like, hey, buckle up, cowboy, because this is going to be a long road and you're going to have some limitations. And I got into a victim story mindset. And the thing is, a whole bunch of people validated it because something horrific happened. They're like, oh yeah, I feel so badly for you. And I'm like, yeah, I feel badly for myself. And that energy just fed on that energy. And it was like a big snowball effect.
Michael, with that, that's such an important point that I think a lot of times people don't understand. We talked a little bit about story before coming on here, and what you tell yourself, the story that you tell yourself might be true. And other people might completely agree with you. But that victim mentality that you were living in obviously wasn't helping you. And so I always talk about how the story's true, but if it doesn't help you, why tell yourself that story?
Yeah, it's like spot on. And because the thing is, when we tell ourselves those negative self-narratives, as I like to say, what the body does is it actually releases some stress hormones. So when the body is releasing stress hormones, like say cortisol, through this negative story of worry and doubt and fear and shame and all that, then in my position, it was really hard to heal, right? My body was already inflamed. What I was trying to do is try to reduce the inflammation of my body because I had a whole bunch of hurt and pain all over the place. Now I was adding to it through my self-narrative, the stuff in my head. And I didn't get anywhere close to acceptance until they flew me back to New Jersey. I went to another hospital in New Jersey to have some skin graft operations because I had to cut me my left leg is a little bit of a patchwork. It's like old pair of jeans that got all patched up.
That's in style now, right?
Yeah, it is. Well, you know what? There was a time where I was really sort of self-conscious of them. And I was like, well, maybe we can remove these skin grafts because they're pretty people are staring. Again, more storytelling, right? In my own head. And then I realized my scars, all of our scars, all of our wrinkles and blemishes and gray hairs and all that jazz, they tell our story of resilience. And if I remove them, then I remove part of that story. So, I kept them. It's sort of they're sort of like my tattoos because I don't have tattoos, but I have some wickedly cool scars.
Right on.
But I went to another rehab hospital called Kessler here in New Jersey. It's where they took my Superman, Christopher Reeves, played Superman back in the day, after he had his equestrian accident. And when I was there for several weeks, and then I had a physical rehab session. And in that session, there was a big aha. Now I know there was a whole bunch of micro ahas that led up to the big macro one. But I realized in that moment, if I was going to become the best version of who I could be, then I had to start to shift my mindset. And I went back to a quote by Viktor Frankl, it sort of goes like this, that that the events in our lives don't define who we are, but rather our response to them does. And I studied that, and I was like, all right, well, I don't have to be defined by this accident. I don't have to play the victim. I can create a different narrative that is more abundant, that sort of can motivate me, that I'm resilient. I can be a victor, because I was looking for another V word to match with victim. So I was like, I'm going to move from victim to victor.
Nice.
And it was a little bit of like a mind trick, if you will, to sort of get me into a different narrative. And what I also realized is that in that moment, and having some time also to reflect after the rehab session when I went back to my hospital bed, that all of our events in our lives are neutral until we label them. And I sat with that for a while, and that's when I decided that July 11th, 2001 was going to be my last bad day. That at the end of every day, I get to choose how I label it. Because every day is neutral. Every event within our days are neutral until we label them. And we're really quick to label things as good or bad or right or wrong, especially in today's world. So I decided like that day was going to be my last bad one. And certainly I've had challenging days. I've had days with emotions like sadness and frustration, and I've been angry. But what I realized is that every day I can go to bed and my wife is there and my daughters are in my life, then how can I ever say that I've ever, that it's a bad day? So when I have the people around me that, I care about, who care about me, it's impossible to have a bad day. Again, you can have a challenging day. I'm not saying to your listeners that life is all a bunch of unicorns, rainbows, and Skittles. I've had my moments. I've just learned how to shift out of them faster.
And I want to get to that. I just want to say about Viktor Frankl, that quote really means a lot to me as well. Man's Search for Meaning had a huge impact on me reading that book, and just how, the meaning we attach to things is really the only meaning that we experience. So when you put that label on, that's what you experience. So when you say, you never have a bad day, if you never label it a bad day, you can't really experience it. And not to say that you won't have your moments, or you might not have bad days, but like you said, you get to choose. And for anybody, Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning is like definitely one of my top 10 books, because it will change the way you look at life. Just with the whole concentration camps, the Jews were there, and they didn't know whether they were going to ever get out. They didn't know whether they were going to die there. They didn't know whether they were going to get food or they were going to get beaten. And yet some of them survived, and he found it was because they searched for a meaning in their suffering. So pretty powerful stuff there.
No, great book. Definitely should be on everyone's reading list, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And for you, when you talk about shifting quickly, you say you're able to do it quicker. Let's talk a little bit of strategy, because here at Unleash Success, we like to go and understand what are the actions that give us the biggest results. Talking about a little bit the 80-20 rule. 80% of our results come from 20% of our actions. The key is knowing which actions to take. And I think that the biggest thing to people's success in life and their view of whether they feel like they've had a good day or a happy day or even a great day is what happens in those little moments, those shifts. Do they stay stressed for 6 hours? Do they need, drugs or alcohol to relieve their stress? Do they need something else to kind of, switch their mindset? But I know that there's definitely ways to be able to do it faster. I'm just curious, like, what are your methods? What's your strategy?
Yeah, great question. Because and we know a lot of people, in your circle, Corey, in my circle, that try to numb things, or their stress stays with them for a while. And before my accident, before my recovery, if something bad happened at work, that could ruin my whole day. And sometimes, if it was big enough, it could ruin the whole weekend. So here it was 5 minutes at work, and now I'm reliving it all weekend. When I was supposed to be living life and spending time with my daughters and my wife, I was replaying the movie. And I was like, well, how is that helping? So one of the things I learned through my recovery after that day, where I was like, all right, time to change the rules, time to change how I show up. When I had that big aha, I made a commitment to sort of reconnect with my breath. And I developed something called grabbing a PBR. Now, most people are like, Pabst Blue Ribbon, like that, like you just said, like you're not supposed to numb your pain. So it's PBR doesn't stand for Pabst Blue Ribbon because I'm a big believer that life is too short to drink bad beer, no matter what people say. The hipsters of Brooklyn, no offense to the hipsters of Brooklyn, but
spot on.
I would rather drink something else. But PBR for me in that moment through my recovery stands for pause, breathe, and reflect. So when I had moments where I felt I was triggered, when I got into my own headspace where I found myself like fearful or having some anxiety or beating myself up and sort of shaming myself, I would try to just hit the pause button, the power of the pause, reconnect with my breath as simply as just like inhale for a count of 4, hold for a count of 2, exhale for a count of 4, hold for 2, and just do that for a minute or two. And then take a moment to just be reflective with this notion that I'm not responsible for my first thought, Michael, but I am responsible for my second thought and my first action. So I wanted to give us some time to say, okay, well, this has happened. Do I want to let it go? Can I let it go? And how do I want to move forward? And so that gave me a chance to be much more responsive and thoughtful about my actions as opposed to reactive, which in today's world, we're so busy. We're busy being busy. It's the most common thing I hear from my corporate executives. I'll say, hey, how's your day? Busy. I'm like, and now we play this like battle of who's the busiest. So for me, it just helps slows things down. And I often recommend to people like grab a PBR multiple times during the day in between like meetings, in between events, in traffic. Just don't close your eyes in traffic. But for
solid advice.
But for Sal, it's only the best advice for you, Ness, right?
Thank
you. Don't drive with your eyes closed, right? So that's a winner.
I think that the power of breath, though, is something that people really forget. In fact, when you get stressed out,
totally.
People, they end up holding their breath in and they don't even realize it. They're clenching their teeth. They're everything's constricted. And just by exhaling sometimes, that's why people say take a deep breath. But I love what you say because I really, I use that as well, just a breath pattern, because that can shift your physiology. It can actually change the way you feel. And so it'll relax you and calm you back down. Definitely a way to shift your mindset using your body. And, I'm really big on that as well. I wanted to talk about what you said with, with the power of breath, with the PBR, and then shifting in the moment. What else can you do? If like with going back to just kind of your story where, you got this car hit you, and I'm thinking about like, what if you've got more than just a stressful moment, but it's like, hey, like you've really got some anxiety, or you talked a little bit about acceptance. You've got some anger maybe towards somebody because they did this to you. How do you get over that? Like, so if people who are kind of struggling, not just day to day, but with something bigger.
Yeah. So that's awesome question. So in the last chapter of Shift, I give folks 20 ways of being, going back to what you mentioned earlier, like be, do, have. So number 2 is be accepting. So accept the situation as is. It doesn't mean you're tolerating it or happy about it, but you're just accepting what is as is. Number 3 is about forgiveness. And so I'll share a story about that because I had a hard time letting go and forgiving the driver, right? He wasn't supposed to be on the road. He had a revoked license. He had 5 DUIs on his New Mexico driver's license. So he should not have been driving that day, but he was. And I was angry. I was like, man, you got behind the wheel and you changed someone's life. And, in the beginning, I didn't realize also the whole accident changed his life too. I don't necessarily know how, but it's going to change your life if you're involved. Wherever you are in the equation, things are going to change. But we took a family vacation. You mentioned Viktor Frankl. So we were out in Auschwitz and Birkenau. So we took a family vacation to Europe, and we were going, it was a little bit of a bop around Europe. We started in Paris. We went out to Omaha Beach, the great battleground out there where the U.S. came ashore. And so we saw the cemetery there. And then we flew to Poland, and we met a woman named Eva Kor. She lives in Terre Haute, Indiana, and she runs a Holocaust museum called Candles. And her family was sent to Birkenau when she was a young girl. And her twin sister was there too. And for those that know, how the Jews were treated, if you were a twin, you got tortured. They did like crazy experiments. It was torture throughout, but twins were sort of treated even with a much more special torture, if that's the way to say it. And Eva was there. She was in her late 80s at the time. And she was in her golf cart, and she was like full of spunk and energy. And she's driving us around, like, where she came in the train. And it was the middle of July. There was no shade. It just reeked of death. It was hotter than Hades. And so she's bopping all around, showing us like what happened where, and giving us just her experience. And you're just listening to her, and you're sort of in disbelief that other humans can treat other humans this way. And at the end of the tour, one of the other members of the tour asked her, like, I'm going to probably get it a little bit off, but what I remember is they asked her, like, well, how do you feel about the Germans? How do you feel about the Nazis? Do you still hate them? And what she shared, like, blew me away. She's like, I've forgiven them. And I was like, say what? Like, keep in mind, I still had a little bit of this, like, I hadn't forgiven the driver yet.
Yeah.
And I'm like, how can you? I'm thinking, I started to judge her answer. I'm like, how can you do that, right? After what you've been through. And what she went on to say is like, I've forgiven them, not because they deserve forgiveness, but because I do. Because if I carry around all my anger towards them throughout my whole life, then I couldn't show up in the way that I wanted to show up, in so many words or less. She used her own vernacular, her own vocabulary, but that's in essence what she was sharing. It's like, I have forgiven them because I deserve forgiveness.
Incredible.
And in that moment, Corey, I was like, wow, man, if she can do that, like, I'm letting go of the energy I have towards this driver. I've totally forgiven him. Maybe not because he deserves forgiveness, because what he did was wrong, right? But I deserve it because I was carrying around that baggage in my backpack as I walked through life. And I was holding a grudge, sort of secretly, silently.
And that's heavy too, right? It's really heavy.
Right. And so, and when you let go of it, you're like, wow, all right. So I don't have to use my energy to fight that, like to fight accepting reality. So I let it go. And so often, whether it's in our professional lives or personal lives, someone does something that doesn't jive with our worldview, our perspective. We label it as wrong or not right. And then we get all worked up about it. And that energy builds on itself the next time we interact with that person. And all of a sudden it becomes this like big thing. And if you put enough weeks behind that, you get to a certain point, and now there's a lack of connection. Right? There's a lack of like trust within the community, maybe even at work. And you wonder, like, how did we get here? And no one knows the answer. Well, it's because we never really let go of things. And so I think a big thing in order to have great success in our lives is our ability to let go. When whatever we have in our back pocket that we're carrying around with us isn't serving us well, isn't helpful, then to let it go. And that's not to say you can't be angry, right? When you look at what's happening politically in our country, there's anger. And so you have a couple choices. You can use the energy of anger and do something about it and become part of our community and maybe work for the change that you want to see. But what happens a lot is that people just become the anger. They don't do anything with it. They just sit in it. It's sort of like how I was sitting in it when I first came out of the ICU. But what I realized is like, emotions are good. They're all natural and human. Let's just be really mindful about how we want to use the energy behind them so we can do something good with our lives, so we can drive success. And hopefully that success includes making the lives of those around us a little bit better
Absolutely.
today than as you were yesterday.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And the power of letting go is something I actually haven't talked about in a really long time. So I'm really glad you brought that up, actually, because, especially a lot of people who will be listening to this might be a go-getter, high achiever, and I can relate to that. And sometimes when you're faced with something or somebody does something wrong to you, you really want to fight back on it. You want to like prove your point or make sure that they understand like what was going on with you in a way where you're fighting against it. And you might put so much energy into that fight, even though the results might never change, even though nothing's going to change the fact of what happened, even though you don't have control over what happened. And the power of letting go is something that I know in my own life massively changed my perspective. Just being able to let that go. And I talked about like that grudge or that anger can be really heavy. I spoke from experience. And once I let that go, I experienced more happiness and love in my life.
Yeah, no, I love it. Well, in today's world, and since we live social lives and we're putting out content for a lot of people who might be hustling and grinding it, freelancers, bootstrappers, entrepreneurs, whatever label we want to use, if you're putting out content, it's not going to be for everyone. And you might get a doubter, you might get a hater. And I've seen so many people like get so fixated on the one star or the 1 2-star. Or they want to push back on someone that gives a different point of view. And what I try to, share with them is just let that go. What you're putting forth in the world ain't for them. And we don't have to be the lid to every pot out there. So let them have their perspective. It does you no good to try to prove that you're right and they're wrong. It's we can get so addicted to being right. We have a lot of addictions in our society, obviously. Our drug addiction with pain meds is a big one. But I think one of our biggest ones that we don't speak about a lot is our addiction to being right. And it just leads to more debate and argument than really necessary. Yes, there are some things worth fighting for, but we don't necessarily have to be, a participant in every battle we're invited to.
I got a question for you too. Just what do you see? You work with business leaders and consulting them, going through what you've done, this life-altering experience, talking about shift, what do you see as the biggest thing that stops people from achieving their success?
I would say self-doubt and that self-narrative where we get in our own head and we come up with this not so productive movie or script that holds us back. So, and I work with people that are really successful. They rank high in their companies, directors, VPs, even chief operating officers, CEOs. And what I find is that when they get to that position and they're like, oh wow, I got to the job that I've always wanted. And here they are, they've been hustling and grinding it for our conversation today to get to that level. And all the great stuff that got them there, they stopped doing. They play it safe. They don't innovate. They don't try to push themselves out of the comfort zone. It's almost like they have this self-narrative to say, I just got to hold on to this job until I retire. And they stop betting on themselves. And what I try to work with them on is to release some of the storytelling, release a little bit of that inner critic, all that stuff that can get in their way, and realize that they can bet on themselves and they can continue to grow and continue to evolve and take risk, and hopefully help them believe that everything is figure outable. But a lot of it is that self-doubt. It's that internal narrative. And especially if they're shouldering the burden of everything and they're playing Superman at work and Superman at home, that's a lot to carry, especially for some that are maybe in their 40s and they're just at halftime in their career. I'm like, how do you want the rest of your career to go? Like, you're only at halftime. You're doing really well, but this is time for the halftime pump-up talk, the motivational speech, because you don't want to get to the end of your career when you're 55 or 60 and sort of just drag across the finish line. That's no way to finish a great career. So we work on strategies and purpose and planning to make sure they finish as strongly as they started.
Absolutely. And, one of the big things that the slogan that you have, creating better tomorrows.
Yes.
Yeah, I love that. I wanted to know what's kind of some of your top tips or advice for making today, if somebody's having a bad day today, they're listening to this, to make today their last bad day ever, or, a bad day in the past, their last bad day ever. And then every single day after this, creating a better tomorrow.
Yes. So that creating better tomorrows was born out of my rehab. So when I had my big aha and I told myself, all right, we're going to show up different. And I'm going to put in the effort. I'm going to put in the physical labor, but more importantly, I'm going to put in the emotional labor. The emotional labor is needed to get past that inner critic voice in our head. That I was going to show up today, and all the work I do today was going to help create a better tomorrow. And that was my mantra that I would repeat to myself multiple times a day, almost every day. And then it got shortened to just creating better tomorrows. So I would say a couple different things, Corey. We already talked about the power of the pause and connecting with our breath. So that's key. The other element of it that I would recommend to people is keep pedaling. So for any cyclists out there listening, you know that the key to getting past an obstacle, getting up a hill, or if you're a mountain biker, getting through the nooks and crannies and the logs and the streams, what they tell you is to keep pedaling. Right? To always keep the pedals moving. That's how you stay in balance. That's how you make progress. So I'm a big believer that our success is built from micro wins, micro successes over time, as opposed to that big bolt moment where your video goes viral, right? So we have those. Those are really cool. But most success is built drip by drip, pedal stroke by pedal stroke. So remember to always keep pedaling, to do something today that can help build your better tomorrow. It might be really small. It could be big, but do something. And we can always do something. Don't ever coast, because the minute we coast, it's so much easier when we wake up tomorrow just to continue coasting. And then all of a sudden, you string a few of those days together, and now we're stopped, right? We lose our momentum. And then it's really hard to regain it. So the whole attitude of I'm going to do something today. I'm going to keep pedaling, pedal stroke by pedal stroke, drip by drip. The other thing that you mentioned, Corey, that I would recommend to everyone is to sort of bookend the day with a sense of gratitude. Some people have a gratitude practice in the morning. My gratitude practice happens to be in the evening. What I use the morning for is just some time to think about my intentions for the day, my priorities, which I think is a really good practice to get into. What are those three priorities, the three things I really want to move on today, that I want to keep pedaling on today? But at the end of the night, as I'm brushing my snags, which we call our teeth in our household, before I hit the pillow, I spend a moment what made the day, what made the day a special day? What am I grateful for? And I even allow space to be grateful for some of my not so great moments, even some of my challenges. I've had, as a business owner, I've had moments where, wow, that wasn't very good. I've had, moments in a workshop or a talk where I just wasn't there mentally and it didn't go as well as I wanted. And I could beat myself up before I went to bed, or I try to say, hey, I'm thankful for that moment. I'm grateful for that moment, because here's what I learned. Here's what I learned about preparing and shifting my mindset. So I would say breath, connecting with your breath, your intentions for the day, during the day, the attitude of trying to keep pedaling, even if it's micro gains, that is better than coasting. And then to bookend the day, always spending a few minutes just with gratitude. I think it's a great way to capstone a day. And then, after you get done with gratitude, it's really hard to label the day as a bad day, because that's the last thing you think of before you go to bed.
Michael, that was excellent. What a great series of steps and strategies. And I see a lot of similarities in our daily practices there. And I really like that you're creating better tomorrows. You're not hoping you're going to wake up and have a bad day. You're waking up and you're creating a better day. And the analogy with the bike is so awesome. And if anybody's ever ridden a bike, most people have, it's a lot easier to keep the bike moving if you keep pedaling. But the minute you stop, it requires so much more energy to get back started. It's like an object in motion stays in motion. An object, sitting on the couch stays on the couch.
No, it's like an Einstein thing, right? I think Einstein there's a meme out there, or a note card or a quote card out there, where it's like, if you want to stay like, life is like a bicycle. In order to stay balanced, you have to keep pedaling. And it's just the way I've decided to live my life. But to your point, like, it's about action, right? I am into mindfulness. I'm into meditation. I'm into a lot of things, Corey, that you're into, including action. So I'm not sitting on my couch just wishing for my success to come. You got to go out there and you got to put in the work. You got to hustle and grind, or whatever you want to call it, to make things happen. And along the way, you got to have the right mindset, but you got to put a little sweat equity in if you want to realize the success.
Absolutely. Michael, this has been an incredible conversation. I love going into the insight, learning about your story and how you made your last bad day and created a shift, and then sharing that with others to create better tomorrows. Where can everybody find you online if they want to connect with you?
Yeah, the best place to go would be my website, which is Michael O'Brien Shift. You got to put the F in there, or it comes up with a different website. So Michael O'Brien Shift.com. And there they can pick up a copy of Shift. There they can get an autographed copy. You can go to Amazon, of course, and give Jeff Bezos a little money, because it sounds like he might be a little poor. So you can go either spot. The one thing, Corey, if I could share about Shift,
sure,
is that when I wrote it, it wasn't about making money. It was all about the message of, shifting your perspective, the whole spirit that we go where our eyes go, mindset, building resilience, and the value of community. So when the book was about to be released, I sat down with my wife and I said, why don't we give the money away? All the proceeds go to a charity called World Bicycle Relief, WBR. They're based in Chicago, and they help girls conquer the challenge of distance in countries like Kenya and Malawi and Zaire. They go into the local villages and they give the girls a bicycle. And to help them stay in school. So many of these girls are walking 12 kilometers each way to get to school, and they get to a certain age where they have to think about dropping out, or either going to school on the back of a motorbike driven by a young man, which just exposes them to sexual violence. So WBR comes in with a buffalo bike, and they can ride that bike, and that 12-kilometer walk is now a 12-kilometer bike. So they give them mobility, and they end up graduating. They end up marrying later in life, having smaller families. But the key thing is that they have economic vitality. So what I love about Shift is, I tell people, is like, you'll read it, and I know the readers will get something out of it. They'll get something out of it that will change their life. But know that because they bought a copy, it's helping change a life somewhere halfway around the world. And I'm a big believer that if you change lives anywhere, you change lives everywhere. And so every 10 copies of Shift that we sell goes to building a bike for a girl somewhere halfway across the planet. So it's a great, win-win-win. So I just want to share that with you and your audience as they pick up a copy.
Thank you, Michael. I really appreciate you sharing that. And what a testament to just kind of who you are and how you're not just creating better tomorrows through your book, but actively donating to help other people create a better tomorrow for their future. Really, really inspiring. I like that a lot. And can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming here on Unleash Success and sharing your knowledge with us. You've had a lot of success after changing everything back in 2001. For you, what is your next level of success?
I would say my next level of success is, building out my leadership academy. What I wanted to do is build something out for all the people in the middle. So I coach executives, and they get company-sponsored coaching. But I've created something this year called the Paceline Academy for everyone in the middle that wouldn't get a corporate-sponsored coach, and they can't afford my services out of their own pocket. And I want to try to help more people and sort of spread that message and help the next generation of leaders. If I could leave one thing behind, that next level of success is that the future leaders of companies, lead in a different way so we can solve the problems of tomorrow a little bit better. I remain very optimistic about where we can be as a society, as a planet, but we need better leaders. And I'm hoping that, at least in a small way, the Paceline Academy can help grow a new crop of leaders that will really innovate and help us change more lives, because that's why I do what I do.
That's awesome. And you're absolutely right. The world always needs more leaders. So I love the goal. And Michael, thank you so much for coming on Unleash Success.
Thanks, Corey. And thanks to your listeners. I hope they got a pearl or two out of our conversation.
If you enjoyed the show and learned something of value, the one ask that I have is please go subscribe, whether you're on iTunes, Spotify, or YouTube. And if you leave us a 5-star rating and review, that absolutely helps us get our message out there. Each week, I'm going to continue to interview amazing people, and we're going to break down their tools and strategies to help get you real results. Feel free to visit the website, unleashsuccess.com, and subscribe to our newsletter so you can get updates each week. And remember, knowing is not enough. Knowledge alone is not power. Action is. Because action is the only way you're going to get the results you want in life and truly live the life of your dreams. So take some action, subscribe to the podcast today, and get ready to unleash success in you.